Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlotte, and thank you so much for joining us for the online Minerals to Metals Forum hosted by the Southern African Institute for Mining and Metallurgy. Just some quick housekeeping. Because we are all participants in this forum platform. We do not have a Q&A section, but we do have the chat, so please do drop your questions there during the discussion. And after the presentations, we will have a session to answer those questions. Please note that the forum is recorded and will be made available to the public. So if you wish to remain anonymous, please do so by changing your name and leaving your questions in the chat section. If you have any issues or would like to be added to the mailing list, again, my name is Charlotte, and you can just drop me a chat message and I'll help you out. So today we are going to speak about the Sustainable Recycling Industry Project, or the SRI project, which is aimed at building capacity for sustainable and inclusive secondary resource management in South Africa. I'm very pleased to introduce our presenters today. First, we have Susanne Karcher, who, after completing her chemical engineering studies in Germany, she started her company EnviroSense that specializes in planning, development, and facilitation of tailor-made governmental, industrial/commercial, and residential integrated resource and waste management programs, ultimately geared towards pollution prevention. Susanne is a qualified resource efficiency and cleaner production end-use level trainer with the NCPC, as well as a founding member of the African Circular Economy Network. From 2010 to 2020, she chaired the Southern African E-Waste Alliance and contributed to the recent development of the EPR system related to waste electronic and electrical equipment. Susanne has a long history of collaborating with the World Resources Forum on selected e-waste research projects, including the development of the guideline principles for sustainable management of secondary metals, and alongside being the lead author of the related fact sheets from worst to good practices in secondary metals recovery. She also assists in the World Resources Forum with the development of grassroots Train of Trainers e-waste manual for Ghana. Since September 2020, Susanne has been appointed as the National Coordinator for the SRI project in South Africa. Alongside her, we have Chris Whyte. Chris Whyte is the founder of Use It and the Managing Director of Chris Whyte and Associates, Sustainable Pyrolysis Group, and the SDG Africa. He is the Southern African chapter lead and director of the African Circular Economy Network and the director of Imagine If. Since 1992, Chris has been involved in environmental and sustainable project developments across Africa and channeled his focus into waste from 1999. He founded and headed Use It, the Waste Materials Recovery Industry Development Program in Durban since 2009 to 2020, facilitating the creation of more than 2,600 jobs in the waste and recycling sector at that time, leveraging nearly 5 times their funding in landfill saving to the municipality and an additional 10 times that funding in commercial project development. He has created a good model for green economic development and innovation in South Africa. Chris deals with every aspect of the waste stream to explore, invent, and create sustainable opportunities in waste beneficiation, and touches on all key aspects of sustainability and drivers for the circular economy. I'm so glad to have both of you here on the forum to chat about your new endeavor. Thank you so much, Susanne. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. Now comes the hardest part, finding the share screen. That should be working. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Fabulous. I'm going to put it in presentation mode. So, are we in presentation mode? Excellent. Thank you so much for the nice introduction, Aisha. So today I want to introduce you together with my colleague Chris about the SRI project, which has recently been started in South Africa. And I come with an agenda because this is really about exploring mutual opportunities for collaboration and partnership, because as I will show you, we have a lot on our plate. And we need good people in work groups and teams to achieve certain objectives that we have set out to do. Before we go into the local content, I just want to give you, well, you had the house rules, so that can be jumped. I want to introduce you first to the global program, because this is not just a South African program, this is a global program. And the way it works is that SRI is actually working in 5 different countries. It is building on the success of implementing systems together with various developing countries, like for more than 15 years. I personally have already connections with the World Resources Forum since 2005. So that's the 15 years. And the SRI is funded by the Swiss government, which is basically SECO, which is the Economic Affairs government. And then also it's implemented by Swiss Empa. Swiss Empa is basically looking at testing, material testings and science, and the World Resources Forum Association. This program specifically, that SRI program, will run until June 2023. And we started out with some delay in around September 2020. So the idea really is to create with 3 favorable framework conditions that enable the development of a sustainable recycling industry for e-waste, but also related waste streams. And we see more and more with the SRI project emerging in other countries, not so much in South Africa yet, that we're talking about also other secondary resources now increasingly, like for example in Ghana, there's a huge study on ULABs, used lead acid batteries, but even tires as well. The countries we have SRI representation is Ghana, South Africa, Egypt, Colombia, and Peru. And the overall understanding is obviously the concept of a circular economy, mitigation of climate change, and really finding a way to optimize the recovery of secondary raw materials with a focus on metals. That was the initial focus, but as I said, the focus is widening now more towards secondary resources. In the case of South Africa, we will still stick pretty much close to e-waste though. This just shows you the triple bottom line approach of what SRI is all about. People, the environment, and the economy. It really is about safe and equitable working conditions and local community relations and resilience. For the environment, protecting the environment, preventing harm, and obviously for the economy, creating value through the recovery of those resources and optimizing that recovery and value proposition. Those are basically also underpinning the guidance principles that have been developed earlier, and I will share that with you a bit more information later. So the way this worked with SRI, it is now in the second phase. South Africa was not part of the first phase officially, but I've been kept quite close to what was going on. So even without not being officially a partner, we knew what was going on. And what is interesting about the SRI program, the way it's structured, is that it has a generic lock framework, and that lock framework is applicable to every single SRI country. So it doesn't matter which country it is. This is what all the countries need to deliver on. And you can read it for yourself. The first outcome that's required is policy. So we have been employed here in South Africa and my colleagues in other countries to assist with the development of an adequate policy and legislative framework that enables the implementation of a sustainable e-waste management system. As you know, we do not have dedicated e-waste policy on a national level in South Africa yet, or on any level. So this is a key objective for us as well. Normative is another word for how can we create standards, that can create a level playing field, looking into the value chain, the operational chain of all the e-waste service providers. How can you create entry-level opportunities for the smaller guys, obviously keeping in mind that there needs to be legally compliant operations. So in our case, as I will expand later, this will translate into norms and standards development for e-waste practitioners. That's what we have in mind. Number 3 is mostly concerned with a local component. It really is about building a skilled business environment, and Chris will tell you much more later about it. But the local pilot area will be Ilembe. Ilembe is based in KwaZulu-Natal, and the idea is really to promote an informal sector-based integration model, which will afford to collect electronic waste and safely take it to recyclers. So we're going to go into a pilot project there, and we'll unpack that a bit later. And then problematic fractions, not so much of an emphasis here in South Africa, but that's why I'm so glad to have a very strong collaboration with the academic institutions, including UCT, because that gives us a great opportunity to actually look at solving problematic fractions, finding solutions in the value chain, quite easily. And then what makes this project so powerful is that there is an international exchange component. So since all of our countries, all the national coordinators, all the local coordinators strive for exactly the same outcomes, there's obviously an optimal opportunity for international exchange of best practice and of knowledge. So for example, Egypt might be more advanced in the development of certain training materials, so we can directly plug into and compare notes with Egypt. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that has already proven to be really interesting. What needs to be kept in mind is that all the three concepts and methods are actually meant for international community of practice, and they are seen as a global public good. So there's nothing here in terms of IP. Whatever is developed by the World Resources Forum is actually for the global public good. This just shows you a small selection, and if you go onto their website, you will see much, much more reports, but I just literally drew out those reports because they are in some way or the other concerned with improved e-waste management. If we start from the left side, this is one of the key elements that came out in 2017, which is the ISA-IWA guidance principles report, which basically, as it says, guidance principles for the sustainable management of secondary metals. There are basically 5 sustainability areas: working conditions, environmental conditions, optimized recovery, and overall sustainable management. And there's also notion about traceability, traceability chain and chain of custodies, and how those can be developed. Out of this came then an appendix, which was fact sheets, because we realized that is an important thing. And I was actually leading that publication. It's all freely available on their website, from worst to good practices in secondary metal recovery. So we looked at the globally observable practices that are really bad, that creating a huge negative environmental health and safety impact. And we kind of described them in detail, and where possible, what could be alternative practices to replace such worst practices. In some cases, there are no replacements. I mean, artisanal amalgamation, in the gold extraction, there is no recommendation for a better practice. This is just a kind of practice that needs to be, banned. And here's other documents from other colleagues. One that has been proven very successful, the dismantling guide for IT equipment, showing step by step with a lot of pictures how to dismantle various equipment. Also, colleagues of mine in India have gone a long way to look at how e-waste plastics can be identified and actually separated the flame retardant treated from the non-flame retardant and then processed, so creating new markets for this. And also what is very interesting is that they have also done very detailed assessment reports of mapping informal sectors and formal sectors, not in South Africa, but in Egypt. But what is nice is we can look at the methodology of how the mapping took place and literally take over the strategy approach of how Egypt has conducted their research, which is what we plan as well. So what is newly planned in terms of another ISO document and building on those guidance principles, that was the starting points, is actually, and that's just like as an announcement what's to come, there will be a new work item proposal, and it has already been successfully submitted to ISO on sustainability and traceability requirements of secondary materials. And this will be wider than just metals, but that's why it says secondary materials. So it's going to be named Secondary Materials Principles, Sustainability and Traceability Requirements. And it will basically be a hybrid between TC 207 and TC 323. So those are aspects of environmental management and circular economy, which will be combined. And that working group will reflect this type of expertises in their technical committees. So let's go back, local as lekker, South Africa. What is going on now on the SRI project on South African level exclusively? First of all, when I was asked to put a project proposal together in terms of why do we need the SRI project, I had to also do a risk profile, a risk assessment of saying, you know, where are the pain points where things can go wrong, where are the key challenges, and you know the things that we identified here is obviously we have a missing national e-waste policy. We are in a very funny situation. You know, we have now very soon the EPR regulations coming into place for electronic waste and packaging and paper and lighting, but we don't really have a policy. So in a way, we put the horse perhaps a bit in front of the car, because first you have the policy and then you do develop the regulations. In our case, it will be the other way around. Then also the other thing that is a status quo, which is a huge problem at the moment currently, expensive licenses of licensing of e-waste recycling operators. There is this waste management license requirement, and it's very costly. It takes a long time to receive it. And, you know, it creates a huge divide between just a handful of formally and fully compliant operating recyclers, and then a whole bunch of smaller guys that actually fly under the radar the moment they reach those thresholds, because they cannot afford or they don't want to engage into this process. And the idea is really that the future norms and standards will be developed in a way that they will do away with this current waste license requirement. So that would remove a major bottleneck. We have also very unclear conditions for investments into new technologies, because one of the things we figured is we do have not really end processing capacity in South Africa. So the way it works here in this country is there's a lot of dismantling going on. It's pretty much also cherry picking at this stage without the additional EPR funds. So that might hopefully change soon. But as it is right now, it's predominantly cherry picking of value fractions. First and foremost, printed circuit boards. Then there are recyclers. The small recyclers sell it to the big recyclers. The big recyclers do some kind of concentration enhancement because they have different kind of fractions of PC boards, up to 4 different fractions that are having different values. And so they enhance the concentration of the precious metals like that. And then basically all of it is sent overseas to overseas smelters such as Umicore or Boliden. So the wealth of the minerals that can be recovered as secondary metals are not staying within South Africa. So we don't have really this end processing capacity. And what will be crucial to make this viable is that we're going to create in future economies of scale. So there's a lot of emphasis now to look at a SADC type of approach, to work with other countries, that we can channel electronic waste from those countries to South Africa as a major treatment hub that would create economies of scale. But at the moment, those investment situations are unclear, and we need to make a clear business case for anyone to put money on the table. As I mentioned, cherry picking is happening, and yeah, we have just an unsupported and defragmented industry representation, and we need to actually really support an inclusive stakeholder process. We do know that our government is very, very firm on the requirement for informal sector integration. All the EPR regulations have to deliver on this. So this is really what we mean also with an inclusive stakeholder process. And all the actions need to be obviously sustainable. So they need to be aligned with national and regional priorities and connected to ongoing policy requirements. So we are walking a tight line at the moment. You know, we want to develop policy, we want to develop norms and standards, but they need to also harmonize with the currently introduced EPR system. So, you know, the proof will be in the pudding and the devil will be in the detail, but we need to obviously have a complete overview what else is going on. For example, the provincial government in Gauteng is also in the process of developing an e-waste strategy. So all of those things that happen on provincial level, they need to feed in and they need to get harmonized. It would be very dangerous to develop, things on different levels and they don't harmonize and can then actually become counterproductive. So we need to make sure that we have all the stakeholders that we need to be involved in all the key project aspects, that we deliver all the outcomes in a transparent manner. As I said, it's all about for the public good to create a level playing field. So there's no IP that we develop with anyone. If you collaborate with us, it's for the greater good. And yeah, we need to be flexible to adapt to emerging new demands. And those demands are happening, very fast. The goalposts are changing all the time. We need to support the framework conditions to serve as a level playing field, and also to develop consistent project content and input on the basis of scientific findings, which is why I have been from the beginning very close to my academic colleagues. I studied myself at UCT chemical engineering. So it's very important for me as well that, when we do value chain mapping and develop an e-waste landscape, that this is based not on guesswork, but really on academic findings. And we have already started jointly to develop questionnaires, for example, for recyclers. And all of those things are part of academic research projects. And that gives the required quality, I'd say. So this is basically what's happening in South Africa. Again, the outcomes are generic, policy, normative, business, and problematic, but it will translate in our case to obviously some very clear South African related context. So in terms of policy, the first thing will be on a national level to support the drafting of e-waste policy, as I mentioned, but also that the corresponding e-waste policy, that the national e-waste policy will be then translated in corresponding e-waste management bylaws in the Ilembe district municipality and also the provincial organizations. Because remember, it's important that the policy is actually implementable, and the implementation is not happening on a national level, but rather on provincial level, and then to some degree on municipal. So we must make very sure that whatever this policy will entail is actually doable and not just like a pie in the sky type of approach. The other thing under policy is that my job is to assist producer responsible organizations to prepare. So I've sent out an invitation letter to all the existing PROs offering support from SRI to say, where are your pain points? Share with us, where are the gaps? What is it, what you require? How can SRI assist the PROs to get ready for this EPR strategy? On a normative level, it would be really the norms and standards, which ultimately should then replace the license requirements. And what the government threw in when we discussed the scope of the SRI project, they threw in that they want not just a framework that is actually addressing the norms and standards for the formal service providers, but also a framework on minimum requirements for the informal sector. So we will see norms and standards for both formal and informal sector representatives. Those norms and standards at a later stage will then have to be able to get audited. So developing of auditing schemes and protocols is required, as well as to create capacity for people that have the knowledge to test against those auditing protocols and to be able to assess the performance of service providers. On the business side, and Chris gives more detail, but it will basically be to develop a national training curriculum and programs that are based on train-of-trainer concepts. Luckily, the MICT CETA has forged ahead in the last few months already to develop a suggested NQF level 5 based national training curriculum for an e-waste operations controller. So I was quite involved in assisting with providing input into the outline of the proposed modules. And then, and Chris will talk about this more in detail later, is really to assist existing innovation and incentive development initiatives, specifically in Ilembe, to strategies for startups and to develop actually a simple technology platform in form of an app that enables a pilot project for informal sector integration in Ilembe. And then finally, the problematic fractions. we look at some of the things. We know that our government has now made provision for the delisting of certain waste streams. So my suggestion was perhaps to do a mapping of e-waste components and find perhaps certain parts in the electronic waste or materials in the electronic waste that could be delisted according to those opportunities. But this is like still also in pie in the sky. We haven't really started working on this. So the main activities so far is the country project has now been initiated officially. We have determined the 3 team members. That's myself and that's Chris. And then we have another lady, Sharon Moffat from Votella LED, who is very much linked up with the municipal side in Ilembe, forming a very important link. We have concluded an activity report that had to give the forecast of what we want to plan to do. And I will share much detail with you later what this is all about and the timelines and deliverables. We have formed a steering committee for the SRI project, and I'm very pleased to say that it is very, very high level steering committee. We have representation not just from the Swiss embassy, but also from the 3 key departments, which is the DFFE, which used to be DEF, so don't get confused. It's still the same department. The department is called now the Department for Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, but it's still the same as Department of Environment, Forests and Fisheries. So they are in there. It is the DTIC as well as the Department of Science and Innovation. So all the managing directors of those departments are actually directly sitting in the steering committee, which is great because you have an environmental aspect, you have a job creation aspect, and you have a science and innovation aspect. And those are all covered through the steering committee representation. We have also started signing a whole list of letters of intent and memorandums of understanding, including with the University of Johannesburg, UWC, the Appliance Bank, some of the PROs, and a recently formed organization also that is actually now creating the voice of the recyclers for the EPR implementation to represent their interest, specifically called R2E2. So we had our launch and we had a press release. And now we're basically going to the work. And this just shows you in much more detail what is actually sitting under all those things. I'm not going to dwell for too long, but you can see certain things I have marked in red. And the reason I've marked them in red is because there's already some delay when you start to write those activity reports. You are very optimistic of how quickly things can be done. So we have already, encountered some delays with this. This is still outstanding. We want to do a desktop research study, what's out there internationally regarding policy. I've collected all the relevant documents, but I haven't really made a comparative analysis yet. There's lots going on. STEP has developed, policy recommendations. There were already policies developed in Africa, in Rwanda, in Morocco, in Kenya. And, it's just a case of looking at how their policies are structured. Colombia has a policy as well. And what's very important is also now we're going ahead to actually develop a draft national policy framework. And for this, we need a multi-stakeholder work group. And this is where we're busy as we speak. I'm busy trying to get a meeting now with Department of Environmental Affairs that we can discuss the strategy that we need. And then as soon as we have this work group together, we need to find members for the local work group which can translate then the national policy development steps into local content for the bylaws that we need to develop. In terms, again, of outcome 1, what is also important is that we create an e-waste landscape report saying who is there, who are the local role players, the value chain mapping. Again, we've made some progress thanks to my academic colleagues that have, looked at certain aspects. So this is actually going somewhere already. And I've also already reached out to the PROs and offered support from the 3 perspective. I had in principle from all the 3 PROs a positive reply of principally interested. They asked all for a non-disclosure agreement, for things of IP that they add to the mix. And I have actually provided that, but made it also very clear that whatever is the outcome of our collaboration will be for the public good. On number 2, this is predominantly concerned with the development of norms and standards. We are right now in the process of setting up a work group. We have already identified relevant people that we would like to have on this work group. Some of the people who are here today would be actually also part of this work group. They are not knowing it yet, but I'll share that later. But the idea would be to have those norms and standards ready by October. That would be just the one for formal and informal. But then we're also planning on norms and standards for more exotic waste streams, things like lamps, batteries, solar panels, to be followed a bit later next year, earlier next year. And then what's important is also not just to develop the norms and standards, but also implementation guidelines. How can those norms and standards be implemented? How can the value chain stakeholders use them and understand them? And that will be very important indeed as well. And then as soon, that's a bit more in the past, in the future, as soon as we have the norms and standards, really the idea would be we need to develop auditing capacity. We need to develop auditing schemes. We need to find pilot project partners like recyclers and even collaborate with PROs to see how do those norms and standards sit to be able, for example, to affect a tier-based rating system that a PRO would use in order to allocate EPR money to certain recyclers. And this is really what Chris is concerned with. So he will speak about this in more detail, but it will definitely be a strong local component, future train of trainers in Ilembe, development of training curriculum to have this introductory course, and then also a training on how this app will be used. And this will be based at informal sector, and they will be then mapped on how they're going to go ahead with collecting electronic waste, both from households and from local businesses, and bring those then to the best paying person, which would be hopefully the local recyclers. So we want to cut out the middleman as best as possible. Yeah, and this is the other thing. It should lead, as I say, to a star or tier-based grading system of different service providers. So we hope that out of the norms and standards, we can structure it in a way that it lends itself already to a tier-based grading system that can be directly adopted by PROs to assess, different service providers. This is basically all related also to local. The local landscape for Ilembe is important. Who are the key stakeholders there? And also the training components that we need to develop for the pilot project. Okay, and that would be the hazardous waste fractions, where we have also outputs like finding locally applicable solutions for the safe management of those waste fractions and elaborate. We have had a meeting now. We're planning on a student exchange. At the moment, it looks like it's more of a one-way exchange, but a Swiss student that would then be supervised by UG Peets in partnership with Swiss Empa. And the student is likely to look at e-waste plastics and establishing opportunities. What are the volumes, but also what are the opportunities in terms of creating perhaps business opportunities from the recovery and recycling of e-waste plastics. At the moment, most of them getting just landfilled. So nationally based, what has happened, where we started already, I mentioned it earlier, I got involved with the Gauteng Department of e-Government because they have already churned out a draft e-waste strategy and they have an implementation and action plan. We asked them kindly to take a step back because they wanted to make this already a public document. And we said, look, let's first get the national policy on the road. And we put a strong recommendation to the HD in that regard, and could convince her that this strategy should rather be used initially in-house. So we are pushing the government, the provincial government now to develop procurement policies in-house and start collecting electronics that have stockpiled in the government in-house. We try to link them up then to refurbishment and dismantling startup operations. we have already invited the PROs for collaboration. I've commenced the policy desktop analysis, and we have already worked on the national landscape report. We are busy establishing this work group. And as I said, the MTM work group has in outcome 3 already gone ahead, and we have already in principle a curriculum on the table. It currently sits with the QTCA, which stands for Quality Training, I don't know, something, but they have to approve it. And if they approve that proposed curriculum, then it can be further developed and it can become a proper course that can then be taught with the MTM. Chris, over to you to say a little bit more on what's going on locally. Thank you. We don't hear you. You're still on mute, Chris.
Forgets. Thank you very much. I tend to get to do a lot more of the exciting stuff, and poor old Susanne stuck with most of the admin stuff. As she said, I'm the local technical coordinator, and I've also been working in the EUA sector for quite a few years. It's never been my focus because I kind of focus on all waste. But the opportunity we're looking at is first of all, is to look at understanding the linkages and partnerships and collaboration, cooperation with other organizations. We've done that to start off with through the DTRC, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And they're linked in obviously through the National Cleaner Production Centre of South Africa with UNIDO, looking at the Global Eco-Industrial Parks Program. So there's definitely an opportunity in terms of looking at demonstrating the viability and the benefits of eco-industrial approaches and scaling up resource productivity, improving economic, environmental, and social performances of businesses, and contributing to inclusive and sustainable industrial development. So the SRI initiative really fits in with these EIP plans for Alemba. This is going to be through the SECO Industrial Park in Mandini. We're going to link that to the 2 local business chambers and also with the NCPC EWA strategies that they've done in Mpumalanga, and try and collaborate on the landscape assessment of role players and projects in the area. So SRI project really needs to see how we can contribute to this, as well as the broader waste beneficiation projects that are going to look at bolstering the local economy. There's a lot more to it than just the US side of things. One needs to understand the cross-pollination with other projects and the other applications where one can generate opportunities through the same sort of initiatives that will support other project developments. So if you look at the EIPs, the opportunity again is to look at materials. So there are opportunities in terms of material development that could contribute towards the infrastructural requirements of eco-industrial parks, but then also the opportunities to put processing systems within those parks to attribute to the outcomes and outputs that they're looking at from the eco-industrial development perspective. The next slide.
Oh, of course.
So the other part of it is looking at the app development. This has been a really exciting sort of application, specifically because at the onset, we didn't know what was out there. So we had basically a blank canvas to have a look at what's out there. But in doing a detailed analysis, we've come across a number of different initiatives, about 6 or 7 of them that we've looked at that are already working in the app development sector. So it makes sense, again, not to try and reinvent the wheel. And we've found some really exciting opportunities in terms of the different applications. A couple of them we're looking at, for example, Kodoti and Piwe, or the Basadi solutions. And the idea behind an app is quite complicated, because from an e-waste perspective, it's very difficult to create an app purely on e-waste, first and foremost. If one's going to look at e-waste, then look at the rest of the waste streams as well, and see if we can dovetail in with opportunities to enhance those different applications as well. So with e-waste, though, there are peculiarities around e-waste that are quite specific, and it's not the same as collecting as an informal collector going to pick up a bag of plastic bottles. So we need to look at key criteria around understanding, first of all, the source of the waste. Is the source coming from a household? Is it coming from a business, a retail sector? Is it data sensitive? Is it coming from SARS or government? But then also the capacity to collect what's there and what then happens with it. So if we have a housewife who's saying, I've got an old cell phone and a kettle, and I need to get these things going, there are opportunities where we can enter that information online, but then be selective in terms of who collects it and how they collect it. So what we don't want is a business who has 100 computers that they are wanting to put into refurbishment recycling and then have 3,000 informal pickers knocking on the door, coming to collect it. On the other side, we don't want the larger collectors. I'm still on that same slide. We don't want the larger collectors going into the housewife type market where they're going to be wasting resources. So there's a specific link in terms of looking at the spatial dynamic, the size dynamic, the volume dynamic, but then also looking at tracking and tracing. So what we want to try and do is determine what waste is going where. So we want to be able to look at saying this is an HP computer or a Dell computer or a Lenovo, it's a Samsung cell phone, it's a Whirlpool dishwasher, and to be able to try and track and trace that, which is then going to be useful information for the OEMs as well as for forward planning. So the idea is to create a system that's going to take us through all of those different elements, from the post-consumer waste problems right through to reclaimers and being able to empower them, allow them to share profits in the opportunities, but then also to track and trace so we know exactly where this thing ends up at the end of the day, that we can see Mrs. Smith's cell phone has gone through this collection process and has now been dismantled by a certified or a compliant component. Thank you. Next slide. So the local work group is very important. We need to look at the local stakeholders, the local role players, or try and determine the framework of who plays what role, where, and when. And this would include the public sector, private sector, community collectors, NPOs, CSOs, the informal collectors, agencies, etc. That's in progress, and obviously it's also trying to see, in terms of what we're trying to do, does not upset or disrupt the existing systems, but enhances what is happening at the moment. And this is my favorite part. So I love looking at the problem waste stream solutions, and there's already a number of opportunities in the area. So there's some great work that's being done with printer cartridges and using the high impact polystyrene from printer cartridges and converting that into what they call this Easy Go, which is a mobility or portable laptop stand. And they're actually very nice. So it lifts the computer up from an ergonomic perspective, but also stops the computer from overheating. And again, this contributes to the employment of some 48 disabled people working in the stripping component, who are working both on the refurbishment and the dismantling of printer cartridges. And CRT glass is kind of going out of fashion, but there's still a lot of glass fractions also in e-waste, and there are a multitude of different applications for that glass. So certain levels of glass obviously are lead glass. I can see Harrow's putting up comments, so he's probably going to be wondering about the lead. Obviously, lead will not go into any sort of consumer applications, but that could go into potential applications as an aggregate. We would look at other components going into filtration glass and other building mediums. For example, the product on the right is the ocean paver system that's being produced from mixed contaminated waste plastics and crushed glass, and that can replace conventional concrete products. Wiring is another issue. There's plenty of wires out there. Again, most people are looking for the nice big thick wires, and they use wire strippers, very simple technology, but nobody wants the thin stuff and the problematic stuff. So there are systems and solutions in place that use a granulation system with a mechanical separation to separate the steel and the copper fractions as a clean product. And we're developing markets also for the PVC around cables, looking at Wellington boot manufacture. So there's a number of different opportunities in terms of each of those fractions. Some of the stuff we did before, for example, the ABS, what does the ABS stand for again?
Acrylonitrile or something.
Acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. Again, one of the problematic e-waste fractions. And we've actually worked with a group in Pietermaritzburg that have managed to convert those into elbow joints and components for guttering systems quite successfully. So it's also looking at trying to develop markets and applications for the different fractions, but also determining where the systems are. So I see Harrow put a comment in terms of understanding the hazardous fractions. We do need to be aware of any of the BFRs and any other sort of flame retardant plastics, but also to understand the different types of plastics and what we can do with them. Obviously, if there are flame retardants or chlorides in those, it's very difficult to look at conventional mechanisms for processing those, but there are alternatives, and we're looking at working into those. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. I will breeze through those last slides because just to show you that is the final missing link that we have. So there's the national coordinator, that's me, then there's Chris, basically looking at the bigger picture of beneficiation in Ilembe. And then we have Shannon, and she's from Vutela LED. Vutela LED is a project that runs already. And the SRI component is basically falling in one of the deliverables, which is building inclusive growth. So under that aspect, she is definitely assisting in trying to create linkages specifically to municipal officials, you know, because she has them already in work groups, and it's important to have a consolidated approach because all of those things hang together and shouldn't be seen in silo structure. So she helps us to make sure that we connect those dots. Connecting the dots, that's actually a really nice next word because you can see another slide that says exactly this. And that's just to show you already how the SRI project is trying to connect the dots. It was Takunda, I think, who drew up this first map, which is a bit difficult to read because in the middle it says e-waste research, and then it kind of radiates outwards. And you know, there are then different components described of e-waste research, and then those branch out into smaller aspects. So, but what you can see is that we started filling in, you know, with color cookies, our organizations, just to see where are the overlaps, where are the collaboration opportunities. And I have to say, in a very short space of time, we've already collaborated quite intensely. And you know, the fact that we can present here today to your organization is also really one of those perks and benefits of having this close collaboration links with UG, the University of Johannesburg, UCT, UWC, KZN as well. Yeah. So this comes now to the end, and I'm showing you this very urgent appeal. We need you. And why would we need you? Because this is a huge task ahead. The big ticket items that we need to cover with the SRI project is obviously the national policy development and the local bylaws development and the norms and standards development, both for the formal and informal value chain stakeholders. Those are the big ticket items, and those will be obviously depending on a lot of stakeholder inputs. And the way it has been done in other countries also is via work groups. So I'm going around as I speak, trying to identify suitable people that can join certain work groups, which I can send a formal invite from the SRI side to say, would you form part of this work group, where we would very clearly try to assign roles and responsibilities, specific roles and responsibilities for everyone in the work group, so that we really have a complementary setup of people. And under academic research, it happens already, but anyone who contributes to value chain mapping is most welcome. Anyone who provides information for the e-waste landscape report, as we have already started with UG PEATS, but more information on this, very welcome. And as you see, Chris is very passionate also about all those hazardous waste fractions. So any additional research related to any hazardous waste fractions found in e-waste, please plug it into our project. I would really like that. So thank you so much for your interest in this SRI project and allowing us to introduce you the components. I would really like now to see, are there any outstanding issues that you wish me to address, or Chris, and then really any other subjects, and please questions and answers, fire away. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Definitely collaboration is the key for today, so let's get involved. we've got a question here from Harrow asking about whether you're going to focus in on end processing. So the gold is refined at Rand Refinery. About 1.5 tons of gold produced in South Africa, a total of 120 tons, is from e-waste. That came from the LCA component of the SRI project. So
interesting.
What is there going to be no end processing considered, or where does that stand?
Well, it will be forming part of the value chain mapping in terms of making, future decisions. But it is not per se perceived right now to be a key focus on trying to develop actively end processing capacity. As I say, the practicalities are mostly sitting in Ilembe. Hey, Chris?
Well, I mean, the opportunity is to understand the volumes that we have.
Yes.
I doubt very much there would be sufficient capacity to look at any new capacity for hydro or pyrometallurgical or even mechanical separation of different precious metals. But we would link into the likes of Rand Refinery, SA Precious Metals and existing initiatives, and rather look at supporting the local systems. The good thing about e-waste metals is that they have a high enough value to transport long distances. So we would certainly be looking at rather trying to support the existing initiatives within the country.
I'd like to hand over to Harrow to expand. I see your hands up.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it was really just a comment on the observation or the claim that there is no end processing. Yeah, overall volumes of e-waste are small in South Africa compared to other places, and that's a real problem. But yeah, the interesting bit is that we do have pockets of end processing, but we might actually miss the intermediate processing. So that gold, I don't know whether the intermediate processing actually happens in South Africa, and might be the intermediate processing happens abroad and then comes back. There's very few places in the world that can do the sort of end processing. But we also do, and Jochen might be able to, or Tandazile might be able to comment on that, a lot of the copper is end processed back in South Africa, actually.
Yeah. I've seen that as well, yeah. At SA Metal, for example, they have a vertically integrated system there where they literally recover. They have their own little smelter there, and they take out the copper and the tin, and they even make products that they sell on there in a shop. That's true, yeah.
The interesting component to that, obviously, copper is copper is copper. I mean, one very rarely sees alloys of copper, and the copper price has almost doubled in the last year. So there's no problem with the copper market. The aluminium has also significantly increased. I think that's almost doubled in the last 2 years as well. But there's been a lot of work done in terms of understanding the aluminium within e-waste. And there are many, many different alloys of aluminium. So again, it's understanding what the end use format of that is and who can process that. So we've approached Hewlett's, for example, Hewlett's Aluminium, to take e-waste aluminium, and they're not interested. They only want the cans. But there are other opportunities for downstream beneficiation of different aluminium alloys. And that's a market that we need to try and tap into as well.
We have a comment here from Anthony, just speaking to the kinds of carts that are being used in informal recycling, and perhaps that's part of the, I'm not entirely sure, but how would we then facilitate that kind of waste infrastructure at an informal level, and whether SRI would be looking into something along those lines, trying to custom design large wheeled units to make it more accessible for local informal recycling, as well as creating more accessible collection points.
It's a huge question in terms of the conventional recycling market, looking at the collector who's looking at plastic, paper, cardboard, etc. It's not a focus of the SRI project at this stage, simply because the focus is more on the e-waste side of things here. It's not always e-waste. As Susanne said, they are looking at tires and other problematic waste streams in other projects around the world. But the focus here is again from the app perspective. E-waste is heavier than most other waste. So it doesn't really fit into the same sort of trolley model type system. Obviously, those with a trolley would be able to pick up e-waste as well. It doesn't work that, it doesn't exclude them from that process. But the idea really is to try and match the source with the collector and the processor. So I think Harold also said, we need to track and trace to make sure that the person who picks up the computer is not going to go behind your backyard and smash it and just take out the copper. So the track and trace allows us to be able to make sure that it goes from the collector, or the housewife, the collector, then to a potentially a middleman, or directly to an end processor who would then weigh it, and they would report back on the system. So that has got to go full circle before anybody gets any credits on that system, which then allows the collector to, they won't be able to collect on their credits and vouchers through either the blockchain system or the voucher system, unless it's gone right through the system. So that track and trace is vitally important.
Absolutely, and we would capture this with pictures, for example, even necessary, you know, taking the weight, so that we can really make sure that from a mass balance perspective, everything arrives. We know who the recyclers are in Ilembe. There would be then, you know, Reclite and SIMS, and in Dalu e-waste, those are the local recyclers. But we're also looking at, you know, if we can expand the scope. We have been very clear to the three people that we cannot create an economically viable e-waste collection system in Ilembe. There's just not enough electronic waste. So the idea was to rather utilize it and make a point of saying we're testing an app, and that can then be adopted by other 3 countries, you know, or in other contexts. That app could be used where there could be a financial business case for the collection of e-waste. And what we also know is that in the real world, those people, we don't really have those specialized collectors like they have them in Ghana. If people go around from the informal waste collectors, they collect anything that has a value. So I think what's really important is that ultimately we take cognizance of the reality that those people collect everything they can lay their hands on, and find also ways to link up, you know, with other PROs or industrial voluntary organizations, which provide solutions for other waste streams outside of e-waste.
There's kind of a closing comment from Anthony that I'll just read out. The model that the people develop themselves with no assistance could be increased to most industries, I think. Advantage is that it exists and it's basically community developed. Should be harnessed. So I suppose we can end on that note, is that we do really have to learn and collaborate with those that are involved in closely building the very thing that works best for them. So
no one has done it before, so we're going to get our noses bloody. That's part of being courageous. But yeah, anyone who is actually up for it, and we're going to do definitely grassroots research, and we will find what works by doing it, especially poor Chris. He will learn by doing it. So please join our work groups. Yeah.
We did actually just get one more question. We do have 2 minutes, so let's go for it. Carol asks, the policies to be developed, will it hold manufacturers to account for their products and packaging? So I suppose this speaks to EPR and the current kind of EPR saga that we're involved in. So yeah, what do you think around that?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, we wanted to know exactly what the story is. So if it is a brand owner from outside and you actually buy this dishwasher, it will be the first point of sale. And yes, you will be liable to join both a PRO for electronics as well as one for paper and packaging. So if you package your thing in cardboard and styrofoam, you would actually be expected to also join those PROs. However, if you locally manufacture or locally assemble, that's what Empa says, he would assume that, you know, if you then, that you should only reflect your core business in terms of joining the PRO, because the other costs, like for example, packaging, would have already been absorbed further up. Someone would have paid them already in South Africa. That is the latest that I heard.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Chris, do you want to add to that point? Maybe a little last thought on EPR and how that's going to be used.
There's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of EPR. I know there's been a lot of webinars. I sit on the KZN Council for the Institute of Waste Management as well, amongst a number of other things that I do. And we've been trying to inform people about the EPRs. It is difficult. The reality is that very few people understand how they fit into that. So even if you're an importer, you need to be registered to a PRO. Chatting to one group at the moment that does some of the packaging locally, but imports other products, which means that they don't need to register for the local packaging, but they need to register for the imported packaging. And then there needs to be a duty of care as to what happens with the products and where they go. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The EPRs are not going to be watertight and 100% when they are eventually implemented in May this year. It's going to be something that's going to evolve over time. There's going to be a lot of licking of wounds and shouting and screaming, but it will slowly come together. It is something we need as a country. But also the EPR system here has to be very much different to what we're looking at in terms of EPR developments in Europe and America. We have an upside down collection model where the bulk of our materials are collected by the informal sector. So our EPR needs to support the informal sector and not the processor, which is very different to what's happening internationally. But at the end of the day, the polluter must pay. And that sounds fantastic, but it's you and me are going to pay at the end of the day because they're just going to pass it on to the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, on the EPR system, the key points that were bemoaned was, as Chris said, you know, this uncertain role about who's the producer, specifically when it comes to online shops. Where are the online shops? It was, you know, Empa said that they consider online shops also almost similar to a brand owner. So if you are like a take-a-lot, you would assume the role of a brand owner. You would also be a producer. And the other big point of contention was the life cycle analysis. The producers were not happy about the idea of a life cycle analysis. And they have pushed out the time for when it is required. But initially it was meant to be according to certain standards that no one had heard of. So I think that is still also something that people will be at loggerhead when we introduce it. Yeah. Oh, well, so it would be great if you have any interest to get more involved with SRI, join any of the work groups, even just contribute to certain information. You know now exactly what we need for our outcomes. Please, if you could consolidate this, everything past Aisha, that I would really appreciate that.
Yes, please. Everyone, I'll drop my email in the chat, and you can get a hold of me, and I'll also pass everything on. But thank you so much for the session. I really appreciate it, and it was very informative. And yeah, let's get started, I suppose.
Let's get dirty. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Very much.